Welcome back to the Fowler Project, everybody. My name is Jeff, and today we're going to be doing a September wrap-up and a look forward at the October TBR. So in the month of September, I finished 3 books and made decent chunks in progress towards a few more. So I'm going to start off with the finished ones, and then we'll head on towards those back burner books. So the first book that I read was The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. It was the fantastic follow-up to The Poppy War. Second book in the trilogy, the third one comes out in November, The Burning God. Book 2 did a phenomenal job of carrying on the story and keeping Rin's development on track. She's not the most likable character. She definitely makes some questionable decisions, but you can't deny that she's very complex. And the historical influences that go into her character really start to come out, and you get a little bit of tastes for them that she's not gonna be the best person in this world. We really get to see how Rin interacts with some of the other characters, especially Castell and some of the other survivors from the first book, and we get left in a really great position for the Burning God. I'm very excited to see where this trilogy goes, how it ends. I've got some pretty high expectations, but I think Kuang is going to be able to pull it off fabulously. Book number 2 was Traitor's Blade by Sebastien de Castell. This is the first book in the Greatcoats series. It is a Three Musketeers-esque adventure swashbuckling tale set in kind of a grimmish fantasy world. This world is split up into 9 duchies ruled by 9 very immoral dukes. Our main characters are Falchio, Kest, and Brasti. They are 3 of the king's traveling magistrates that kind of interpret the law of the land and provide judiciary services. They're not the most well-liked people by the dukes, to put it lightly. The dukes have actually killed the king a few years prior to the start of our story, and these greatcoats are running around trying to fulfill his dying wishes. Overall, this was a very fun story to read. I did have a few issues with some of the plot points. There's a lot of conveniences that appear in this story, some things that could be described as Deus Ex Machina endings. If you're able to look past that and kind of enjoy the story for what it is, I think you'll have a really, really good time with these characters. All right, and that brings us to book number 3, which was Knight's Shadow, the second book in the Greatcoats trilogy. This was a fantastic follow-up to Traitor's Blade. Those plot point issues that I mentioned that can kind of come off as Deus Ex Machina in the first book, a lot of them get resolved in this book, and we find out that there were actually reasonings and workings behind the scenes that led to them. We just weren't aware of it because of the limited perspective of the main character. In this book, we get a lot more time with some of the best characters from book 1, especially Kest and Brasti. We also get introduced to a few new exciting characters, and we start to learn more about the various factions of this world. You have the Greatcoats, you have the Dashini, which are kind of like an assassin group, and there are these mystical bards that have kind of some special powers that we're still learning about, but we kind of get to know a little bit more of their backstory as well. Overall, this book really expands the universe, does a lot on the world building and the roles at play, and really, really sold me on continuing the rest of the series. All right, now some things that I've started or have been working on but keeping on the back burner, and gonna roll them over into October or at some point in the near future. I recently picked up 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City by KJ Parker on a Kindle sale, and I read the first 50 pages of that or so. I really like it so far. Very interesting premise. Our main character is an engineer with a less than stellar reputation. He ends up being trapped inside of a city during a siege and is trying to do the best that he can to keep himself alive and therefore kind of keep the rest of the city going as well. I know KJ Parker is well known for doing massive amounts of research, not only into his setting, but also into the smaller minutiae of his worlds, especially when it comes to warfare or siege or weapons making. So I'm very excited to continue with this book. I also started reading The Three Musketeers, which is a classic swashbuckling story featuring D'Artagnan as he tries to enlist himself into the King's Musketeers. I actually started reading this one right before I picked up The Greatcoats, and The Greatcoats definitely takes a lot of influence from this story. Very well done, but it was kind of scratching the same itch for me, so I'm going to keep reading The Greatcoats, and then I will probably return to this one after I finish that series. I've also been working my way through the third book in the Paternus series, Paternus War of the Gods. I mentioned the first two books in my Best Books of 2020 video a couple weeks ago. This is the stellar conclusion that wraps everything up. I've been kind of taking my time with it and really stretching it out to savor it all. It has a whole ton of characters in it at this point, so it's been a little bit of a challenge to also to kind of reintroduce myself to the world and get back on track with who everybody is, what all the motivations are, and where all the pieces are for the big final battle that it's been building up to. It's split into three parts. The first two parts are largely set up and kind of maneuvering the different pieces for both sides around. And I stopped right at the start of part 3, which is still 300 pages. I mean, that could be a whole book in and of itself. But the last part is going to be the big final battle between the good gods and the bad gods. So that should be a roller coaster of a finish that I'm excited to have on deck for October. And finally, my last work in progress book won't be a work in progress for very long. I'm actually hoping to finish this book off after I finish recording this video. It's fairly short. It's The Deep by Rivers Solomon. It's a very interesting novella. It's only about 160 pages, but it packs a punch. The basic premise is during the slave trade, pregnant African women were thrown overboard off of slave ships in order to free up space. These women then drowned in the ocean, but their offspring were still born and developed into these mermaid-like beings. Our story starts a few generations down the line, and they have developed a society. This book has a very interesting concept on memory as well. We follow our main character, who is a historian for the culture, and what that means is she is responsible for keeping all of the collective memories of her ancestors inside her. She's also the only person in the culture that is able to do this, so she is kind of left alone dealing and processing with all of the trauma from her early ancestors and what they went through, while everybody else is kind of floating along, not really understanding where or why they came from. Every year they have a ceremony called the Remembering, where she shares those memories back to them as a way to kind of remind them their roots. But then she takes them back onto herself and leaves them kind of in a blissful naivety of what their people have been through. This book deals a lot with trauma, especially shared trauma and cultural trauma. It also has some interesting notes on sexuality and freedom and family. It's a short book, but it's definitely one that you want to be fully present for when you sit down to read, because it has a lot to say. Another interesting fact that I learned about this book, Rivers Solomon actually wrote this because she was inspired by a song produced by the rap group Clipping, which features Daveed Diggs from Hamilton. So I will leave a link to that song down in the description below if you guys want to check it out, kind of get a taste for the vibe of this story, and decide if you want to read it. All right, now looking forward into October, the TBR has really filled up. I'm going to be kicking off the month with The Greatcoats Book 3, Saint's Blood. I'm very excited for this book. It's kind of promising on expanding on the religion in that world, which is something that's very, very interesting and I would love to know more about. After that, there's a few shelf space buddy reads going on. The official shelf space pick of the month is Leviathan Wakes. I don't know too much about this one. It's a sci-fi. I know it's the first in a 9-book epic series, and that it also has a TV adaptation going on that's, I think, in season 3. Other than that, I'm kind of going in blind on this one. I don't generally read a whole lot of sci-fi. I usually stick to the fantasy side of things, but this one's been getting a lot of good praise over in the shelf space community, so I'm excited to kind of join in and see what the fuss is all about. The unofficial buddy read for shelf space in October is Jade City. Now on the flip side, I've heard a ton of things about this book and I'm super excited. My understanding is that it is kind of a Hong Kong-esque city with a mafia in it that is running off of slinging magic jade rocks to people. More of a modernized fantasy setting. I'm really excited to see that. I've heard that the conflict is on a very personal, familial level, and so that'll be a nice break of pace from the overarching typical save the world stories that we get a lot of in fantasy. I'm also going to be doing a smaller buddy read with Warbreaker, which will be my first Sanderson novel. Heard a lot of good praise. Alex Nieves just released a great review of it over on his channel. I will link that one down below. Obviously, Sanderson gets a lot of praise everywhere, so I'm really excited to finally be breaking into his works. I've heard great things about the magic system in this book and that there are talking swords, so I'm very excited to get into this one. And since October is spooky season, I needed to put something spooky on the TBR list. I'm going to be working my way through the complete works of Edgar Allan Poe. Now, my original plan was to read all of his short stories this month, but my TBR has gotten much bigger since I came up with that idea. So I'm going to try to get through as many as I can. I think this will also be my first reading vlog, so I'll check in with some short videos after my favorites. Let me know down below if you have any recommendations for the stories to start with. I've read The Telltale Heart before. I think that's the only one that I've actually read, and it's been many years since then. So if you have a favorite Edgar Allan Poe short story, let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you guys have a great October lined up for you as well. Please let me know what you guys are reading, if you guys have any favorite books that you're trying to get to in October, or anything that I should check out. Peace.